Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today we have a special guest. Her name is Meghan Wood, and she is the co-founder and CEO of Raya Power. And we're going to talk about lots of cool things from balcony solar to maybe you can explain it to us, Meghan Wood.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today. Excited to talk about all of it. Awesome. So yeah, at Raya Power, our whole goal is how do we make getting residential solar and storage much simpler than today? And we did take a lot of inspiration from sort of what you're seeing in Germany with the balcony solar movement, from do-it-yourself systems. And the idea was to package it into an all-in-one, really simple appliance that you could just plop down, connect to your core appliances, start saving on your energy bills from day one without the need for a construction project, for permits, for custom drawings, but really just simple, like bringing home an IKEA table, setting it up and running it at home. In addition to that bill savings, what was really important to us too was having resilience. So there's an integrated battery in our system that makes sure you have that resilience when you need it for things that matter most to you.
Okay, cool. So how does it connect? What does it connect to?
Yeah, so we typically have kind of two main connection points. One that people love connecting to is a major load. So think of an air conditioner, a mini split air conditioner, a window air conditioner, a heat pump. That's kind of your main load that you'll connect to our system to get your savings on a daily basis. You're running that on a mix of our system as well as the grid. So the grid can flow through our system and continue to run that appliance that's connected if you have a few cloudy days. But whenever you have sun available, it's going to offset that appliance that's connected. So we actually connect directly to that appliance. And then you'll have kind of a typical second connection point, which is a smart strip. And that's where you connect stuff you really care about in an outage. So think fridge, fan, Wi-Fi, things you want to make sure stays on. Maybe it's not enough load to actually use all that solar you're producing every day, but those things you really want to automatically have on in an outage. So those are kind of the main two connection points. And that's what's different from balcony solar today. So with balcony solar, how it typically works is you connect to an existing outlet and you run electricity through your home that way. So you're sending it back through that outlet. There's some rules that are still being ironed out in terms of National Electric Code and UL requirements that we're actively watching. But in the meantime, our system basically connects directly to those appliances to avoid that hurdle. In addition, we're able to provide the automatic backup for those appliances because you're not flowing it through your home. So you don't have that, the system doesn't turn off when the grid turns off.
Okay, great. So you can put this in places that are anti-balcony solar.
Yeah, exactly. There's no restrictions for our system, which is awesome.
Yeah, what that kind of reminds me of a little bit is I have this mini split, which essentially is one of those things that everybody's seen, but maybe not everybody knows what they are. It's a little bit of a heat pump. It's split because there's one piece of it's inside that's got the fan and stuff, and then there's these tubes that run into the outside thing. And right now I'm heating this room, and so I'm blowing cold air outside. And maybe I should put that in a big old refrigerator, and then I could, do like two things at once. That would be kind of a cool idea. I just invented something. Maybe you could take that and make it happen. So this mini split, it's from EJ4, and I've had them on the podcast before too. We talked about this, and we'll put that in the show notes. And it can take a string of solar. So I could just like plug in a string of solar, and it kind of does sort of what you're talking about, but you are using batteries too, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't have batteries. This thing isn't set up to do batteries. So that's pretty cool. And then you said you also have a way where you can put in a power strip and then, charge your phone, make your refrigerator go and stuff like that, I guess.
Exactly. So yeah, very similar idea to that, running your air conditioner on those panels. The idea we had was a lot of people already have existing systems that can't take panels, and so you'd need to upgrade your air conditioner. So the nice thing with our system is we meet people where they're at, so you can connect any type of air conditioner. It doesn't need to be set up for solar. It just needs to be kind of running typically. And then exactly like you said, there's the second opportunity where you really get to use that resilience for whatever you think is most important to keep having on in that outage.
Okay, and us North Americans, we like to have 120 and 240 volts in our buildings, or at least, for residential. So a 120 thing is usually like plug in the wall, light bulb, something that where like a regular non-electrical person will be dealing with it. And then our 240 volt loads are going to be things like what we were talking about, air conditioners, a lot of them. I mean, you do have 120 volt air conditioners, but most of them, mini splits, air conditioners, and things like that are 240. And also you have EV chargers and electric dryers, which are 240 volt things, but they have like special protective mechanisms. So like when I just plugged in my car, I'm not going to get shocked when I unplug it because I have to push a button before it lets me have it, and then it won't make a big old spark. So do your devices work with both 120 and 240?
Yep, exactly. So that was important to us to be able to run those air conditioners at a larger voltage at the 240. And then that smart strip is what really matters for the 120. So that was driven from a lot of on the ground work in Puerto Rico, actually, initially, in talking to people about what mattered a lot in an outage. And especially if you have a restricted system in size, right? If you have a small system that's not going to run your whole home, oftentimes we'd hear like, I'm okay shutting the air conditioner off, but I really can't have my fridge go, or I really can't have my Wi-Fi. I work from home. That's my business. And so having those two options was really important to us. And so our system can run both.
Okay. So maybe you could tell us how things are plugged in. So let's just say we're doing a 120 volt one that, kind of simple. So you're probably going to somehow plug it into a plug in the wall and then plug other stuff into it.
Exactly. So let's say you had a window air conditioner that was plugged into the wall. You now would plug Raya into the wall in that spot and plug the air conditioner into Raya. So now we would be able to draw grid power from that outlet, and then we'd be running the air conditioner. So now we're right in between those two, and that's what allows us to blend in the solar to offset that air conditioner using solar whenever it's available.
And what makes you different from balcony solar is you don't need to go backfeed that plug in the wall.
Exactly. It's a one-way non-export system.
And then how does the solar connect to it?
So the solar is outside, right, connected with that battery, communications, everything happens in those pods. And then basically what's happening towards the home is just the cables of electricity that are flowing, the grid going towards the system, and the outlets in the home to be able to connect your loads. So the solar is being integrated at that point and blended in whenever it's available, and you can prioritize things. So you could prioritize how charged your battery stays, what loads you want to run first in an outage. That's all available to you to make sure you're using the solar however you would like to optimize it.
So let's see if I get this right. So for the one that you just plug into your wall, the simple one, you have a plug in the wall, you have the thing to plug into, maybe has a power strip in it, something like that. And then you also have a PV input. Is there anything else?
No, so the PV input you wouldn't actually be seeing as a consumer. You kind of have these pods if you've seen them on our website, and that's basically the all-in-one. But from a system point of view, correct. There's PV input, there's battery storage, there's grid in, and then there's loads out.
Okay. And so what is the website where people can see this?
RayaPower.com.
And that looks like RAYA, however you spell power, however you spell com.
Exactly.
And then for people on YouTube that are doing this podcast on YouTube, because we have a YouTube channel, maybe you just hold one up for a second.
Yeah, so I have this mini version here you can see. So these are our pods, and basically the front is the solar panel, and then in the pod is everything else integrated. So battery,
cool.
Inverter, electronics, communication, and ballast. So it's actually weighted down so that you have up to a Category 3 hurricane with that ballast in there without needing to create any structural connection to the ground or the walls.
And so for most people, they're not looking at this visually, but let me just kind of explain what it looks like. It kind of reminds me of a speaker monitor for some rock star or something like that that's not using the headphones. And so it kind of like tilts up and looks at you, and it sits on the ground, and it's kind of like triangle shaped from the side, but square, rectangle from the front or the back. And it also reminds me of one time there was this company that made a ballasted PV system, and their way of doing it was you had this plastic thing, and then you just shoveled rocks or dirt or whatever was heavy, maybe like your garbage or whatever, and you put it in this thing, and then you put the PV on top of it. So it kind of seems sort of like that too. So that's pretty cool. So what kind of so you have a PV module on there. Is it just a single PV module for each one, I guess?
Yeah, each one has a 450 watt solar panel.
Okay, so you have a 450 watt solar module, and then you have inside of it, what size battery?
So we sell them initially in sets of 3 pods. So you start with that as your base system. So that would be 3 450 watt solar panels, which is about 1.35 kilowatts of solar. And in that first system, the 3 pods, you can either choose a 2.5 or 5 kilowatt hour battery size across that. Once you have that base 3 pods, you can keep adding pods modularity as you need more power. And each of those additional pods can have an additional 450 watt panel and either 2.5 or 0 kilowatt hours of battery.
Okay, so like a complete system, what would be like the low end of kilowatts of PV and kilowatt hours of battery, and maybe the high end?
Yeah, so the low end is 1.35 kilowatts of solar and 2.5 kilowatt hours of battery. And then basically you can continue to scale that for a while. People typically run out of space in their yard before they get the max system size. And so we're still developing, I would say, the upper end of those and what that looks like for different applications. But it is usually constrained by how much space do you have that's unobstructed in a sunny spot right now.
Okay, so it's kind of unlimited. So I'm going to order a gigawatt when we get done with the podcast.
If you ordered a gigawatt, we'd figure out how to make it work.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. And then it also kind of brings me back to, I remember there was somebody that made like a oven stove thing, and usually with an oven, like for US, Canada residential, you got to have 240 volts, but they wanted to have one that was 120, so they put a battery in it, and then it would plug into 120, so like a plug in the wall, so that way you wouldn't have to upsize your panel, like the electrical panel. Like sometimes people couldn't put in a stove because it would cost them way more than the stove to upgrade from a 100 amp to a 200 amp service. So what they did is they had some batteries inside this stove, and then they could just plug it into the wall, and then when you're not cooking, it would make sure it tops off the batteries. And then hopefully you wouldn't be trying to cook for over an hour or something like that. Then maybe for Thanksgiving you'd have a problem. I'm not sure. Maybe a lot of just heating up the oven, though, is probably that first little burst just to get it hot, now that I think of it.
Yeah, and we're actually exploring, one of our pilots in California is connecting to one of those stoves so that we can charge the battery with our system and see how they work together, which would be great. And the other angle there too is, as you were talking about not having to upgrade a service panel, we've been looking at how can we also supply additional capacity for people for things that they maybe before would have had to upgrade their panel for, and now can add some capacity with the Raya system to actually not have to do that. So that's something we're actively exploring to make sure we can actually, offer that.
Oh, that's cool. What's the name of that stove?
Copper.
Maybe you could introduce me to them and we could talk to them on the podcast too.
They're lovely.
Great. And then how about for electric vehicles? I know electric vehicles, they take a lot. You'd need kind of a lot of batteries for that. But are people doing it much with electric vehicles?
Yeah, we've gotten interest on electric vehicles, and we're actually about to install one of our pilots connecting to one to see how that works. The thinking there is that it would be more of a trickle charge. So rather than charging your, EV all at once with the fast charging, maybe instead you would charge every day enough to use it that day, and kind of keep charging on a daily basis at home rather than charging all at once and then going to use it all. So we're also actively testing that out.
Okay, and then time of use. Do you have it programmed so like you charge the battery when the grid is inexpensive?
Exactly, yeah. So all of those intelligent controls we're building out. We have sort of the baseline now and continuing to advance that to be able to offer time of use and then a future opportunity as well in terms of virtual power plants. So how can we participate in those utility programs that are coming to help you discharge and charge? And when I say discharge, I guess I mean run the load off grid or charge the battery at the best opportune times to also participate in those.
So this also works for just like off-grid battery backup type of stuff?
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of neat. So you could take one camping.
You need a pretty big car. Each one is about 4 feet by 5 feet. That's the current system size. So it could fit in the back of a pickup truck, but definitely made for more permanent use. It doesn't need home modifications. It's not connecting to anything, but once it's set up, it's pretty sturdy in there. And the goal is that you're using it every day to save on electricity as well as backup power, rather than kind of a camping system that you use more one-off when you need it.
Yep. And I would imagine with like balcony solar starting to be a thing and people are talking about it, and it looks like you might even got your original inspiration from it, but it's just not legal in most places in the United States. But as it becomes more legal, which a lot of people think it's going to do, you're probably sitting pretty for that, I guess. You could just probably almost flip a switch and make it work that way.
Yeah, exactly. So we're actively watching that to make sure we can serve those markets as well once it's available. There's kind of two parts we see there. So one is on the utility side, which there's been a lot of incredible progress on in terms of not requiring an interconnection agreement at certain system sizes. The other side of it is the electrical side. So how do you make a system safe for anyone to plug really anywhere? And that's where the National Electric Code and UL requirements come into play. So that's where there's a little bit more, I would say, work still needed on the product side to make sure that people can plug it in anywhere and really make that, I guess, pervasive to anyone, rather than having very specific requirements around that. So that would be a space where we're watching both actively, and it's seeing how we can make sure to offer a system that people in all those different routes. It really opens up, apartments, because our current system is wonderful, but it's really fit for someone who has space in a yard, and we'd love to be able to also serve people in apartments who really need solutions.
Great. Yeah, I know I sit on some electric code panels of, trying to come up what's going to be in the next version, which is the 2029 NEC, which probably won't be adopted in most places until something like 3 years later, 2032. But there's a lot of talk about, how to make balcony solar work and, where are we going to put it? And I know that I think Utah is the first place that's really going for it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I think my understanding was that you still need a dedicated circuit to plug it into. I could be wrong there, but we got some interest from Utah already, or one article, so that was great. We've talked to some folks there.
Yeah, and I've heard some people using, as far as like having a dedicated circuit, that's kind of what held people back. I remember there was some company that was like a tech startup, because I remember they were out of the San Francisco Bay Area and driving to the airport, you see it on some big billboard. And it was something like that. It was like a PV module with a battery, and you could backfeed the grid and stuff with it. And I was like, that doesn't work. That's against the code. And they did disappear. Maybe they were too early. It was probably like between 5 and 10 years ago, something like that. So now seems like the right time to do something like that. And I guess the state can make their own rules. You can make amendments. A lot of states make amendments to the National Electrical Code. But then I heard somebody else put it this way, that when you just plug something into your wall and it's just going into a plug, it's not really a National Electrical Code issue. And I was like, that's kind of interesting, because when I plug my computer into the wall, I'm not like going by the code for that. It's just like my computer is UL listed and it's like, available for me to buy, and I could plug it into the wall. So it is kind of interesting that you could maybe look at it that way, where it's just an appliance that you plug into the wall, and then you would probably go to the UL listing of it too. But I guess the one thing that I see being like tricky for balcony solar is, what if you get somebody that's kind of crazy like I am, and they're like, let's buy 20 of these things and we'll plug them into a bunch of power strips and then make it go into like one plug, and then have like 10 heaters going into one of those power strips, and you might be able to burn something up.
Exactly. That's kind of the edge cases that you have to protect against. And so I think, as you said, it'll come down to what does that UL certification look for the purpose of the system, rather than just kind of individual parts. So it'll be interesting to see how it moves, but it's exciting to see how many people are talking about it. I think a few years ago when I started looking at this, most people said you can't send electricity back through a normal outlet, like just from alone, as saying that's not possible. And so it's great to see how far we've come on that, and really awesome to see how the conversation is shifting. And I think it's clear that there's a need for smaller systems, affordable systems, quick to deploy, not needing all these hurdles. Like, people are looking for solutions as electricity prices rise, as outages continue. Like, that's very clear. And It's a very exciting time to be in the space and see what everyone's coming up with. I think it's ripe for innovation in these smaller systems that people, really want to adopt. And what we find is really cool is once you give someone a system, watching their excitement grow is awesome. Like, oh my God, I didn't know my fridge did that. Or can I put it here and optimize it more? And what if I did this? And people start to interact with their energy in a way that you never used to be able to, and you never really thought of before. And that's really exciting to see.
Yeah, I really like to do things that are illegal. And so one of the things that I think is kind of cool is called guerrilla solar. And Home Power Magazine kind of started that, where people were like backfeeding the grid without a permit. And so I've done it for classes. And a lot of times for a class, I'll bring a inverter that I could plug into the wall and backfeed the wall. And I've even done it off of a battery, like a power supply in my backpack, something like that. And I've backfed a lot of different convention centers. And I remember one time, this is probably like 17 years ago or something like that, I was teaching classes for what was once known as the Ontario Solar Academy. And we were doing most of our classes in Toronto. And we had a class at the Toronto Convention Center. I think it was a CanSIA conference. And we did guerrilla solar. And I sent the picture to Home Power Magazine. And Home Power Magazine, which stopped publishing in 2018, they always had a guy covering up their face backfeeding the grid, like so they couldn't get in trouble. And so the whole class, we were there covering our faces and backfeeding the grid. And then, they didn't even put it in the magazine,
Oh, that's funny.
That's probably why they went out of business.
I'm from Toronto, Canada, so that's a fun connection.
I think I could hear that in your voice. Couple of
I know
words,
other people
about.
say that. I don't hear it, but I think it gives it away.
Say about.
Yeah, about. I don't know. You got to get me talking with other Canadians. You definitely hear it.
Yeah. Eh? Right.
How else would you finish a sentence?
Yep. That's the way to do it. Yep. But yeah, those were some of my favorite days in the industry. It was just like things were growing fast. You guys had a feed-in tariff up there, and they were paying 80.2 cents a kilowatt hour for these systems that are still operating, and they're still making 80.2 cents a kilowatt hour because most feed-in tariffs go for 20 years.
Wow.
And the systems, though, that made that much had to be 10 kilowatts or less. It could be 10 kilowatts of inverter or 10 kilowatts of PV. And so it was pretty cool. It was really exciting. So
yeah, I think it's neat. I feel like there's obviously been a lot of challenges in the solar industry, but I think it's led to more innovation. And I don't know, what we see, at least with our work in Puerto Rico, is when you have expensive prices and a grid that has continuous outages, like everyone starts getting involved. Your Uber driver is talking to you about their solar panels, and it's no longer a climate discussion. It's just like a necessity. And I think it's really awesome to see everyone talk about solar just because they need it, not because it's, this fancy thing. And I imagine that's going to continue to happen more and more as bills continue to rise and outages continue to rise across the states.
Yep. Yeah, Puerto Rico, that's a really good place to have solar because their grid went down for like a long time, or like a lot of the grid did, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's also just kind of frequently there's a bunch of even smaller outages, but it really disrupts your day-to-day life when you're there, and then all of a sudden have an outage.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So are people able to buy these right now?
So you can pre-order them on our website. There's a pre-order button. It's a $99 refundable deposit, and essentially that locks your spot in line. So when we are ready to deliver units, you'll be in that spot in line to get your system first. And so we are working hard to bring that to market, but it's not available yet. We're still finishing up our pilots, and then those will be ready afterwards.
Great. And so how long do you think until we'll be able to start plugging these things in?
The goal is later this year. That's the plan, to get those to customers.
Good. All right. And where are you out of?
So we're in a mix of California and Puerto Rico.
Okay, great. And what part of California?
I'm in San Francisco.
You're in the city. All right.
Yeah.
So I am the president of NorCal Solar, and we are a 52-year-old organization. We're also a chapter of the American Solar Energy Society, which I just recently got elected to the board of directors for. But
Amazing.
We are going to have a party, and you should come to our party. We've done it every year. This will be our third year in a row of doing this party, and it's for Climate Week, SF Climate Week. You probably heard of that, and it's going to be on a Friday in April the 24th in Oakland, right by the BART station. So,
Oh, awesome. I'll put it in my calendar. That
great.
sounds wonderful.
Okay, good. Yeah. And yeah, it should be great where I'm working on this, having good speakers. We've had like some pretty good speakers before. And one of these years too, if you want to be a speaker, we can talk about that also. So
Perfect. Thanks,
Great.
Sean. I'll
Okay.
follow up on that.
cool. Yeah. All right. But you might be in Puerto Rico. So you have an office in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so we spent like half our time in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
Not a bad place to be.
Are you in Puerto Rico now?
Right now I'm in San Francisco,
Okay, great.
but I was there for, a good chunk of last year. I'm improving my Spanish. Unfortunately, I learned French growing up, but I'm expanding to Spanish now.
Where all these languages are related, they call them like the Indo-European language groups. So everything from what they're speaking in India to Ireland, I guess that's kind of the other direction. It's all related, for
Yeah.
all those languages. So, yeah.
The good thing is my co-founder is Puerto Rican, so she gets
good.
she can lead all of our Puerto Rican effort there
Good.
too.
Great. Yeah, I'm co-authoring a book with somebody, Dr. Laura Ward. She's been on the podcast a few different times about grid forming inverters. And so Puerto Rico is a big place for that too. So great.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's see. Is there any other things that you'd like to cover today? Or we could meet again sometime, do another podcast.
Yeah, I think that's it. We're really excited. And thank you so much for chatting today, John.
All right, Meghan Wood, CEO of Raya Power. We'll look forward to talking to you again. And thanks everyone for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast, where you can learn all about solar and storage. That's the rule. People that want to be on the podcast, they can't talk about non-solar and non-storage types of things. But if you do know somebody that wants to be on the podcast, let me know. I'm pretty easy to find out there. And you can also get yourself NABCEP certified. Go to the NABCEP conference. It's going to be a blast over in March in Milwaukee. I have a PV associate class over there, and I can help people get their NABCEP energy storage installation professional certification, or their PV installation professional certification, or their PV associate. And if you don't know what that is, you better get one. Ow! Thanks a lot, Megan.
Thank you, Sean. Have a